Okay, we are officially live for our first video. Okay, so for our professors, I forgot the word, but anyway, I'm Rebecca and
Jennifer.
Okay. After watching the film One Woman, One Vote, we decided to discuss the first 4 conversation starters.
Yeah.
That we were doing. Do either of you want to give a summary, or I can, or of the film?
I didn't even think about a summary on this.
Well, the summary that I wrote down was that the first part of the film, since we only watched 49 minutes of it, focused on key women in the suffragist movement, and it also shows the relationship between abolitionists and suffragists, and then follows the movement all the way into the 20th century. And that's about where we stopped, I think. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I went a little bit beyond that, and it went on to like when women actually became able to vote.
Okay, so you didn't watch that part.
Yeah.
Did you?
I couldn't stop watching it.
Oh, really? I thought it was pretty good.
I did too.
I thought it would have been a good like introduction to the course instead of maybe doing the textbook,
Yeah.
Because it really outlines everything really well and discusses all the key women.
I thought it followed the book really well. I mean, it was almost like I was watching a live version of.
Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of similarities, like about Stanton and stuff. It was like the exact same thing. The Susan B. Anthony when she was arrested, like all that. It was the same thing.
And did you notice that some of the quotes that the movie used were also used in the book? Like
I did, like the one Susan B. Anthony when she got arrested, or when she voted, excuse me. That line that she quoted, it was in the book as well as the video.
There was that one, and I think there was one more, but I can't remember. One thing I think it didn't really do a great job of covering, though, was the book seemed to focus more on African Americans and what they did to forward the movement.
I kind of felt the same thing, but at the same time, to our first question, our first conversation starter here about what it reminded me of is it kind of reminded me of the struggles that African Americans in the South had that was talked about in the book. It's basically the same concept of women were basically having, they were fighting for their rights just like African Americans were fighting for their rights after the Civil War.
Kind of bouncing off of that, when I was looking for similarities between the movie and the textbook, I thought an interesting point was that the women's movement wasn't necessarily an equal fight. Like you had different women had different reasons for wanting the right to vote, and some of them wanted even more than the right to vote. They were focused on social issues like feeding their children and getting their children having a good education. There were differences in what Black Americans wanted, and what white Americans wanted, and what elite women wanted, and what poorer women wanted.
Yeah.
I also thought about that as I was reading, because in the video, you know how it talked about how African American women were a part of the movement, but also in the book, it talks about how they created a separate kind of movement of their own because of that reason. Like they have separate issues to deal with. Like if you're an African American, but you're also a woman, so it's like you have the double.
It almost kind of seemed to me that the white suffragists, they weren't really taking into consideration the African American women. It's like that one comment, I think it was Katie Stanton or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, how she was talking about she'd rather, no, I can't remember. I should have wrote that down and I didn't. She'd rather, something about she'd rather fight for a woman's right to vote than, or it was back during the Constitution thing. I should have wrote that down. Let me see if I can find it in the book here.
There was also a part of the book that talked about, and it was in our first chapter outline, how people really only wanted to support one issue or the other because only one of them was going to get passed at the time. Is that kind of
Well, see,
yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. That's exactly
but see, I was thinking that part to me was more about Black men and like Black men having the right to vote before white women, and like, and that was in the first part of the chapter 2 when they were saying how I mean it's a different type of fight because black men being able to vote before white women, so it's like you can only fight for one thing basically.
Yeah. I don't see how that.
I wrote down a quote from the movie that I thought was, it made me reconsider, which is another piece of the conversation starters. It made me reconsider something that the text said. It just kind of reworded that argument that you just made, Sarah. It said that for women and men, a whole set of customs and assumptions about the way the world was supposed to be were at stake. And that was at 6 minutes in the film. People just weren't, that wasn't what they expected. That wasn't what they were used to. And the way that they thought about women and the way that they thought about African Americans was going to be drastically changed eventually. And they just were reluctant to see that happen.
Right.
Is there anything
I didn't realize, like, you know, the book talks about Susan B. Anthony when she was arrested. That was the thing that what I reconsidered from the textbook was when she was arrested. It seemed the video seemed to go more in detail about what she went through when she was arrested.
Yeah, that's only like a sentence, I think, in the book.
They didn't even give her, you know, her trial by jury. And
yeah,
it just, that whole thing just, it boggled my mind.
On page 287, there is like a small portion where Susan B. Anthony, her writing, talking about when she was arrested, like fairly tried, I guess.
Yeah.
So they did go more into detail in the video than in the book. I think so too.
I actually had to look up and see if it was in the book because I'd completely forgotten that that was even mentioned, since they did go into so much more detail in the actual movie. Another thing that I hadn't really thought about was how long the suffrage movement really went on.
Lasted a long time. I honestly thought that it had, I took a class called the 60s, and it went into a little bit about when women gained the right to vote. And I honestly thought it started in like the early 20th century. I didn't realize it lasted this long.
That's what I was thinking about as well, like when I was reading, because and then I actually thought about it, because to us we're like reading it, and so we read like 1965 this happened, and then like, you know, whatever, we don't actually get the feel of each like month, year, day. So it's like easier for us
I
to
also
feel
didn't
like
realize
it either happened like that.
I also didn't realize it was as big as it was. Like
Mhm.
it had that many women.
I think the video put that into perspective for me, just seeing all those women like working, like actually having a visual to the book,
Yeah.
Well, it's
more real for me.
the movie stated that Katie Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were friends for 50 years.
Yeah.
And to be fighting for women's rights for that long, you really do. You think of it just being in the 20th century and not all the way back. I mean, they went through like the Civil War and Reconstruction together. And we read about that in the textbook, obviously, but you know, I didn't think about it until I saw the movie.
It's really
Well,
sad that neither one of them lived long enough to see women being able to vote throughout the whole country.
Did it seem to you guys like, and I think the film might have touched on this just a little bit, but not that much. It was mainly older women, it seemed like, fighting for the right to vote. It didn't seem like there was very many young, active women like we think of protests today.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the younger, well, I wouldn't say they probably weren't much younger. The ones who were like not in support of women's suffrage, they seem to be the younger ones to me. I may be wrong, but it seemed like it was the older ones that were, you know, during that time that were fighting. And then when Elizabeth Cady Stanton died, and then, you know, a couple of years later, I think Susan B. Anthony died. And then it was the younger ones stepping up and taking over their roles.
Yeah, her daughter, right? Katie Stanton's daughter.
Yeah, her daughter took over her mother's legacy. But it seemed like to me in the video, I could have misinterpreted this wrong, but it just seemed to me that it was almost like the younger ones had Stockholm syndrome and didn't want women's rights.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought of that. Well, something I thought that was ironic was right at the very beginning of the movie, it's at 3 minutes and 15 seconds, someone refers to women as second-class citizens. And I know that when I'm writing, or when I've written papers about slavery and the world before 1865 and all that in the past, that's what people referred African Americans as.
Yeah.
And that, obviously both are wrong, but to think of that being on the same level, like you don't think of women's suffrage really and African American civil rights as being on the same level, you know, but they really, the film made it seem like, or it reinforced the idea that they are and that they should be regarded as such.
See, to me, I think the film kind of showed that they aren't on the same level in a way, because even when they talked about women being involved, the fact that they were Black women, that separated them. So they were, you know, united as women. So they are on the same level as women. But then when it comes to race, that like makes it on the different level. So that like little piece of it, the levels, at least that's how I see it.
I think the book definitely more detail than the movie did, explaining Black women and their role in the suffragist movement. Like there was very little. I think I wrote down that it wasn't until 35 minutes into the film that you get like a substantial amount of information on.
I thought the same thing about the film is when you got about, you know, halfway through it or so, it seemed like it really took off. But what Sarah was saying comment on that. I think if they could have gotten both the white women and the African American women together, I feel like they probably could have made progress a lot quicker. And maybe, I mean, because anytime you're divided, you can't accomplish what you need to accomplish.
Well, it's
Right.
almost, go ahead, Sarah.
What was I gonna say? I was just gonna say, like, as well as you could if you were together. And on page 308, even they talk about how the clubs were even separated. Like the ethic of women's clubs was particularly compelling to African American women because they were not able to participate fully in clubs that were predominantly, you know, for white women. But I do agree with you that if they had a club together, then that would make more sense and then they would get more done for sure.
Stronger by the numbers.
Right.
Well, what I was going to say about them being divided, it's like when slaves were trying to, you know, gain their freedom and the right to vote and everything. Why should it be only white men that get the right to vote? Why don't, if they're a man, shouldn't they have the right to vote? Why didn't black men get their right to vote? So it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're both women. You both should be working towards the right to vote, and yet your clubs and organizations and all that are still separated.
Yeah.
Right.
That's kind of on question number 3 about what it made me reevaluate was the whole women's suffrage as a whole, because, you know, I always thought it was just about voting, but women didn't have any rights, pretty much didn't have any rights at all. I mean, they didn't even have rights to their children and their property, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, that just, and it's just like the African Americans, the struggles that they were facing. That's why it just kind of, it made me rethink that whole time period, what was going on.
I was actually getting ready to bring that up. When it talks about adding a new dimension to your understanding of women's history, women didn't have the right to, their children, their property, or even just like their own body. And the book talks about black women and white men trying to regain control of their bodies, which they didn't have the right to do. And I think in school you learn that it really is just about the right to vote, but the book and the movie together point out that that's not the case.
I know.
Right.
I've taken a lot of history type classes, and you know, anytime it's been, you know, few and far between, a very small section was about women's suffrage, and that's all they would teach you was, you know, it was about women's right to vote. No, it was much deeper than that. And I think this video really, I think it highlights just how deep it was, even more so than the textbook did.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes to my conversation starter, because this whole thing made me like think about why weren't women able to vote in the first place. And in the video it talked about what did it say? It said being able to vote disrupted the harmony of the family. And so that made me think, like, what's the harmony of the family like? Because we read about classes and like how women were basically a part of their husbands, like basically an extension of them, like not even separate. But on page, I think it was 299 in the textbook, it talks about women working and like the criticism that they face. And it just made me like wonder exactly how women voting and becoming independent actually disrupted the family in the very beginning. And like, okay, maybe giving women independence would disrupt the family because they're not at home, but still that kind of doesn't make sense to me. So that's what made me like wonder about it.
Well, I think because towards the end of the portion of the video that we had to watch, do you remember the where it was talking about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her rewriting the Bible?
Yeah, I read
And
that.
she took out everything that said women were basically inferior. I think religion had a lot to do with the fact of why men didn't see women as equals.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Even when people bring up like Adam and Eve,
Yeah,
I feel like that like whole so that makes sense actually.
yeah. I think that had a lot to do with what I don't know. I've taken a lot of religion classes too.
And see, I've taken a lot of history courses, and like religion always plays a huge part, especially in the South, and like the decisions that people make like from the Bible and like how they run their lives, even though they don't follow the Bible like step by step, but they like to follow certain parts of the Bible and then twist it.
Yeah.
To fit their lives or to fit the situation or whatever. So I definitely agree with you.
I don't really understand how we got this far though, because the founding fathers, half of them really had no religion. So somewhere in the founding of the country, I think everybody just relied on what the Bible had to say. And the women, there were several sections in the Bible that said women were inferior, and they took it and ran with it. And we didn't get any rights. We had to fight for those. So.
I agree.
Well, does anybody have any last thoughts they want to say before I submit our broadcast?
I think I'm good. I'll probably think of something when I'm trying to go to sleep tonight, but
yeah, me too. Wait, did we have a fourth person?
Not anymore.
Yeah, she dropped the class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So next Tuesday, I guess.
Yep, next Tuesday. That's 4th of July.
Oh,
if you guys need to reschedule, we can, but I should be okay with the 4th of July. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'll probably take my kid I have a 4-year-old, so he'll probably want to, so we may want to reschedule that maybe I could do Monday. Oh, wait a minute. Monday might be too early for everybody. If Monday's not too early for everybody.
We can look at the module and see what all we have to do, and then
what's due.
Yeah,
I know we have 2 of those outlines due, and one of the what are those things called? The primary sources. So it's 2 outlines this week.
But they're shorter.
Are they? I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, see you guys on whatever day we decide to meet.
Alrighty.
All right.
Bye.
Wait. Bye.